Hi guys, if you like this content, feel free to like and subscribe. And if you are interested in private coaching to help you overcome a toxic relationship and get through those hurdles and deal with some of your childhood trauma, go to www.coachcat.org. And I hope you guys are thriving and doing really well today. So I'm going to talk about, in this video, about loneliness and grief when you get out of a narcissistically abusive relationship and how to heal and how to process that and some things that just to be aware of. So really what's happening when you're going through, the three phases of the relationship with a narcissist. There's the idealization, which is the love bombing. You can do no wrong. They have you on a pedestal. They think everything you do is amazing. And then there's the devaluation, which if you're with more of an overt narcissist can be pretty quick. It can be relatively drastic. If you're with a covert, it tends to be much more slower and over time. You're like a frog being boiled in water. You're just being devalued slowly. So to where they're very dismissive. They're just not, they give you the silent treatment, stonewalling. They don't listen to you really. They'll pretend to listen, but they really aren't listening. They're just not really interested in your internal life. They're not interested in how you feel. They just don't give a shit, right? So that's the devaluation. And you feel that, little bit over time, you're just not feeling valued. You're not feeling, they typically have like a smug superiority. So you just feel like, you don't really matter to them, right? So that's the devaluation. And then they start to subtly or overtly criticize everything you do. And it could be in a very covert form. It could be very subtle. Like if you're with the more of a sociopathic type or the coverts, which are they're even more dangerous than the overts because their devaluation is so subtle and it's so insidious and it's so duplicitous and so full of deception and lies, but careful lies, carefully crafted lies of omission and manipulations, right? So that's a horrible thing, the devaluation, because you can be 5 or 10 years into it and not even know it's actually happening, and you become brainwashed. You develop Stockholm syndrome. You're literally like somebody who's been indoctrinated into a cult. David Koresh was actually a really clear example of a covert narcissist. But anyway, so then there's the discard, right? And that discard can be, narcissists are the only people I know that break up or try to break up like 10-year marriages via text message. That is a covert narcissist move. That is not what normal people do, just not even at all. But if you had somebody try to break up with you over a text message and it was a decade-long marriage, then you're probably with a narcissist. So the discard can be very drastic. And again, remember, they don't discard until they've already secured a new source of supply. Remember, these are people that cannot be alone. They absolutely cannot be alone. They cannot sit with their true feelings and their true self because I think deep down inside, they're, secretly or internally, they're repulsed by themselves. And, what's that movie, Spanglish? Sometimes your low self-esteem is really just good common sense. No, sorry. But I'm not sure that they're in touch with any of these feelings, but they cannot be alone. These narcissists are in one relationship after the other. There's usually overlap. They treat people like objects. So you're just a appliance to them. But when that comes, it can be very, very shocking for the recipient. And, if you're one of the people that are in relationship with one of these narcissists or these sociopaths, you can develop complex PTSD. You can also develop narcissistic abuse syndrome and Stockholm syndrome, where you just have foggy brain. You have a lot of cognitive dissonance. Your brain does not work correctly. I talk to people who are, some coaching clients who are, graduate degrees, and their brain is so foggy, so fuzzy, they can't even read a cartoon and understand what they're reading because their brain has been so impaired by this long-term insidious abuse. So when that happens and the relationship is over, whether you leave the narcissist and go no contact or whether they discard because they've secured a new source of supply, either way, you, as the recipient of that discard, may be feeling some very intense feelings of isolation, grief, and loneliness. And let me just say, if you're having those feelings, you are perfectly normal. It's actually good that you have feelings. It's a sign of how you are in touch with your true self and your humanity. If you are stoic and detached and you don't have any feelings and none of this affects you and you just move on from one relationship to the next with overlap, and you don't really care how it affects children, how it affects people, that's the abnormal. You are not, if you're like that, you're a narcissist or sociopath, you're not bonding. That's the outlier. That's abnormal. The people that are neurotypical and healthy, it's healthy for you to be sad. It's healthy for you to be grieving. It's healthy for you to be lonely and feeling all these feelings. That is normal. That is healthy, especially considering what you've been through. So do not shame yourself if you're having those feelings. Great. I'm glad you're having them, because what it means is you're actually getting some honesty and truth and getting in touch with your true feelings, right? So you're having an emotional experience. That means you are neurotypical in a sense, and you actually have the capacity to bond with other humans, unlike a cluster B personality disordered individual. So let's talk about loneliness. And sometimes this loneliness can be very intense. And what it's doing is the narcissist discards, you have this incredible loneliness, or you leave the relationship, either one. And what it's bringing up is that childhood wounding, that childhood feeling of abandonment and loss and loneliness. And, what I really encourage you to do during this time, and this is so counterintuitive perhaps, but is to embrace the loneliness, to embrace it, because loneliness is actually an emotional state. So being alone and loneliness are two different things. Loneliness is a feeling, right? It's a feeling, and the feeling is, it's a painful emotion. It's a subjective, negative emotional response. Like that is, the painful emotion of loneliness. And if you are experiencing that, that's wonderful. Embrace it. Embrace that feeling. Feel that feeling. And you can use RAIN. The RAIN is the recognize, acknowledge, investigate, and nurture. So recognize, I'm feeling lonely. And, acknowledge. I acknowledge that I'm feeling intense loneliness and grief. Okay, investigate. Why am I feeling intense loneliness and grief? And really, at the core of it, the probably the true reason that you're feeling that is the loss of the hopes and the dreams, right? And that is something that you will experience in a neurotypical relationship as well as one with one of these cluster Bs, right? So you're experiencing the loss of the hopes and dreams. But with a narcissist, I would ask you to consider the idea that what you are really experiencing is the loss of the future faking, the loss of the faux dreams that were fed to you, that were all BS, right? So honestly, your dreams were real, your hopes and wants and desires were real, but from the narcissist perspective, it was always a facade. It was always a lie. And so you're grieving almost like the loss of a delusion, right? But you didn't know it was. You didn't know it was fake. You thought it was real because you're neurotypical. You're a normal, healthy individual. So it's okay to acknowledge and investigate and say, you know what? I'm really sad because I'm sad that all those things that we talked about, that we had hopes and dreams of happening, are all gone, and that, it's just our future plans are gone. But also with that recognition, it might be helpful for you to recognize that from the narcissist perspective, it was a bunch of fakeness, right? It was false. So you're grieving the loss of a false future, and that, again, the future faking, but you're also grieving the loss of the real future that you believed was true. So also acknowledge that truth, right? And then in is nurture. And how can you nurture? You can say to yourself, you know what? I am really sad. I'm really sad because I'm grieving the loss of the hopes and dreams of this relationship that I had hoped for. And it's okay that I feel that way. It's also good for me to acknowledge that although I am grieving the loss of the hopes and dreams of that relationship that I'd hoped for, the reality of the relationship was the antithesis of those hopes and dreams. And so sometimes it can be very, very helpful for you to acknowledge the reality of the relationship that you were in, like what was actually happening in the relationship. And quite frankly, a lot of people will talk about being in a relationship with a narcissist was one of the most profoundly lonely experiences that they had, because they are in a relationship with somebody who cannot connect, who cannot bond. So, and especially if the narcissist isolated you. The neglectful narcissists don't usually isolate too much because they're just so out to lunch and so neglectful and so in their own deal that they don't even care enough or bother enough to isolate you. So you might have still maintained some of your relationships, which I'm glad you did if you did. But if you were in a relationship with one of these that really isolated then you might have felt very lonely in the relationship. And I'll tell you what, there's nothing more lonely than being in a relationship, where you're with somebody who is a ghost, like a cardboard cutout, like they don't really bond with you. There's no bonding, and you're profoundly lonely while you're sitting next to the person that's purporting to be the love of your life. That is actually more lonely than being alone. And I know the difference because I have been, out of the narcissistically abusive relationship, and I have experienced loneliness. But I'll tell you what, it's nothing compared to the facade of being next to somebody who doesn't bond, who doesn't connect, who doesn't have emotional intimacy, who doesn't love. Being next to that and living with that kind of loneliness, it was a far more profound and eerie loneliness than the loneliness of actually being alone. And I really love my company, so I'm really enjoying learning how to be alone. And that's different than being full of loneliness. I'm totally learning that difference. And I have such a great community, so many wonderful friends that quite frankly, I could fill my time up with all sorts of people all the time if I chose to. I choose to not do that too much. I try to balance that. But so, nurture yourself, recognize, acknowledge, investigate, and nurture, and recognize that, this is bringing up some childhood abandonment loneliness. This is bringing up some childhood wounding, some abandonment wounding, and I need to heal that wound. And part of healing that wound is learning how to self-nurture and how to parent yourself. And that means, nourish yourself with wonderful foods, nourish yourself with wonderful people who are not selfish, who are not narcissistic, who are loving and giving and kind people. Nourish yourself by developing a spiritual practice. Nourish yourself by doing trauma-informed yoga. Nourish yourself by going to see a trauma therapist or getting a trauma coach. Nourish yourself by learning and listening to some of these books on healing and how to heal from these narcissistically abusive, addictive, toxic relationships. All of these things: exercise, friends, loving relationships, good food, nice, in adventure, I love to climb mountains. I go climb mountains. You could go get on a surfboard. You can go running, jogging, hiking, whatever. Nurture yourself and start learning to self-parent. And one thing that you can learn through trauma therapy is really, or through trauma coaching, is to learn to recognize that little girl or that little boy that has been, the abandonment wound is on fire. This abandonment wound is way before you ever met the narcissist. It's a wound, and it's saying, ouch, when this person leaves me, it says I'm not worthy, I'm not worthwhile, I'm not wanted, I'm not loved. That is not the truth at all. It's just not the truth. But you've got to tell yourself that. You've got to nurture and self-parent. Like, love that little darling. Love and nurture that little precious girl or boy that is suffering from that abandonment wound. And you reparent. I talk a lot about the inner child reparenting. Like, I'm going to, I reparent that little girl, and I tell her, I've got your back. I've got your back. I love you. I'm going to care for you. I'm not going to abandon you. I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to take care of you. And we together, darling, are going to get through this. And we're going to heal, and we're going to grow, and we are going to really learn how to love ourselves so that we don't allow ourselves to be around abusive, toxic, narcissistic, selfish people. We're not going to allow that anymore, darling, because we are going to take care of you. And what I'm learning is this: the more I learn how to set boundaries, the more I say no to toxic people, the more I say, nope, that's not going to work for me. And the more I learn these healthy boundaries and really address my codependence, what happens is my self-esteem gets better and better and better, because the more I take care of myself, the more I love myself and do kind, self-loving, self-honoring behaviors, then the more nourished and happy and just free and loved I feel. So my self-esteem increases directly in correlation to my healthy boundary setting. So embrace the time you have with yourself. I just got back from climbing a mountain by myself, and I spent 2 days in the wilderness and an overnight by myself, and I haven't done that in a long time. And I climbed a mountain that's almost 14,000 feet, and it was amazing. And I spent so much time up there just enjoying my time with myself. And I'm like, I really am learning to truly love myself and to really want to spend precious time with myself. And I just can't stress how wonderful that was and how good it would be to start learning how to love being alone. That's very different than being lonely. I am not lonely, nowhere near as lonely as I was when I was actually in a relationship with somebody who doesn't bond. And I was constantly trying to, I was accepting breadcrumbs and, ridiculousness and a false relationship and a lack of respect. So if you are by yourself, again, you can be lonely, right? So that means you can have those negative emotions. You can also be lonely when you're with another individual. You can have those negative subjective emotions when you're with another individual, and it can actually make you feel lonely. If you're with a narcissist and they're demeaning you, they're very dismissive, they give you the silent treatment, they stonewall, they make you feel like you don't matter, and they invalidate you, that is incredibly lonely. So just acknowledge that, that you might have been profoundly lonely in that relationship. And so I really encourage you to really embrace this time of healing and to learn to start spending time alone. That's not the same as loneliness. Spend time alone and start to really enjoy your company. And you're going to be learning something that narcissists never can. They can never be alone because they can't stand their own company. They can't stand to be alone. They act as if they don't need people, but they never, ever have breaks in relationships. They're always overlap, cheating, getting new sources of supply. They require outside validation to feel anything, to feel like they're anything. So, again, you're learning this whole beautiful thing that it's okay for you to be alone, enjoy your own company. And for sure, I don't recommend dating right away. Take your time, and I'm going to start doing some videos on adventures in dating after narcissistic abuse, because I've been doing that. But for now, I think it's very good to take some time off and to do a lot of healing and a lot of growth. So I hope you guys are having a wonderful time. I hope you're thriving and doing incredible self-care. And remember, RAIN: recognize, acknowledge, investigate, and nurture. Thank you so much, and have a great day. Bye.